Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Hundley. This is the Sovereign Village Project. We got Gabby Reed right here, and we're very excited to actually figure out how to make this all work. Neither of us are really the most technologically adept. Gabby is more so than I, and she's a saving grace as we figure all of this out. So bear with us, everybody. But we're excited to do this. We're going to shoot for an hour today. We're calling it the Community Hour because that's what it is. It's an hour for us all to connect together and to work on ideas together and shape the future of the Sovereign Village Project. But today it's going to be a little bit easier because we have a lot of things that people want to talk about. I made that previous video asking what people wanted me to answer or topics they wanted me to cover. So we already have a pretty good running list. But if you think of something else, feel free to add a question. New York Redneck, hello.
Yeah, I'll be monitoring the comments. So.
Yes, Gabby's in charge of actually helping us figure out what's going on because I'm already lost by the fact that there's 2 laptops and a phone out. That's already way beyond my comprehension. So Gabby's going to be running the technical end on things. But while this is going to be a community hour and it's going to be a conversation, this first one might be a little bit more self-centered because there was a few comments asking about our background, asking about the Sovereign Village Project, asking about, our stories and all of that. So we are going to start with some introductions and just talk about ourselves a little bit for now, by request only. And then we'll move on to more things after that. But I'll start with the Sovereign Village Project. For those of you who may not have followed since the beginning, or even if you have, we're still figuring out what exactly it is. And the original intention of the Sovereign Village Project, it was a response to everything going on and the realization that the only way we were going to really survive and thrive through these coming times was going to be forming resilient, self-sufficient, sustainable, and regenerative communities. And initially, I thought I had in my mind this vision of the almost stereotypical intentional community. Sorry, our dog is being a little noisy. I had this vision of the stereotypical intentional community and buying a piece of land and subdividing it. But over time, I've come to realize that that's not the most practical approach because we want to create a replicable model that other people around the country and around the world can act on right now. And most people don't have access to the capital needed to buy 100, 200 acres and start a community. So we realized that what we really need to do is come up with a method and come up with documented means of taking an existing community and creating community within it. Creating that community with your neighbors and bringing other people out, but without having the strict formula of a single piece of property. Bring people who are like-minded and create the community that is meeting all of that criteria, that's being self-sufficient, that's regenerating the earth around it, that's planting out food and caring for people and caring for the earth.
We can even use our current kind of situation as a mini example of that.
And that's really how, I guess, as we tell our stories, that'll kind of explain itself a little bit. And there are a couple of great questions there that we'll get to. So part of my story and coming to this realization that we need to just create a community wherever we're at goes back to my background. I was raised in Oregon originally and raised in a former logging town that was pretty much decimated by a lot of federal regulation back in the day when they made a lot of supposedly well-intended regulation about spotted owls and such, and they shut down a lot of the logging. And so my town just withered away. It was this historic old town, and it just slowly died over time. The businesses closed, the stores and shops all closed. It went from a functional town to just a bedroom community where nobody really works there anymore. People just have hobby farms. And I watched the gathering places disappear. My parents actually owned the country store, and after they sold it, it closed down. The tavern closed down. The school, the 100-year-old school, got closed down. And I watched my town die, and I watched it being killed intentionally with zoning and things like that. And so that's just something I always had in the back of my head was like, wow, that's a real problem. That's not okay what happened to the place I was born. And then as I traveled throughout the country, I'm a musician by trade. And as I traveled throughout the country, I saw the same story everywhere. Town after town just decimated by policy. Decimated by, it wasn't just by, sometimes you get a ghost town because you have like a silver boom. Everybody moves to some place in Nevada and they're there to mine the silver runs out and the town dies. That's understandable. But most of these towns are killed by interstates. They're killed by a loss of jobs and urbanization, and things that have traceable causes that you can look to. And so I saw this problem developing, and when I moved to the city, I moved to Nashville to pursue music. I saw that the story was the same. We were all young people. We all left the rural areas where we were from. We all left our communities, and that's lauded. That's what we were raised to think is good, is that you're supposed to leave the country. You're supposed to go to the city. You're supposed to leave that backwards place behind. And that's resulted in decimation. It's decimation of the American landscape and misery in the cities. Sorry, let me turn my radio off here. None of that's been good. And so that was the backstory, the backdrop that I had in mind. And then when, of course, the current operation, or whatever you want to call it, the C word, the V word, when that all started about last year, and when I stood on the third floor on stage of a honky tonk and I watched armed police closing down businesses, I knew it was everything that was in the back of my head. This was time. It was time to go to the country. It was time to form a community. And that's when I formed the channel, and we started exploring homesteading, and we came out here to this rural part of Tennessee. But it was only more recently that our own experiences have made us realize that we need to build, and that we can build community right where we're at. Some of these things are stories I've documented on the channel where we had experiences such as, well, one day a pack of wild dogs came through and killed Gabby's brand new chickens we just got.
We had them for like, what, 3 days?
2 days.
Two days, yeah.
And all my rabbits I just got, all of this at the beginning of the pandemic. So I'd lost all my employment, and I spent all my money just on self-sufficiency, on food, on rabbits, on chickens. And to have them all wiped out in a day was just utterly devastating. And it was then that our neighbors, who we barely knew, came over with armloads of beef from their farm that they had raised. And they just loaded our freezer with meat. And then that's, as we got to know them better, that spring, they started their garden. So we started trading seedlings. And then I had some other folks move nearby to the first property I'd bought. And we also traded garden advice and seedlings with them, and started this network of self-sufficiency. More recently, we had that other incident I made the video about, where we had a conflict in the neighborhood that was resolved as community. And it made me realize that we're developing this idyllic community, this utopian, not really utopian, but this community we want to live in that wasn't here. It's happening around us by us just living rightly and taking the right actions. And so now our goal is to expand that idea and to create a new center of this community, because much like the town I was raised in, this community doesn't have a lot of gathering spaces. It's rural. There's a lot of people out here, but there's no place where people go and meet and talk. You know, they are all shipped somewhere else to go to school. There's still some churches, but they're sparsely attended. There's one bar, restaurant down the road, but that's about it as far as gathering spaces. So we want to create a gathering space and a place of abundance where we have cuttings and a greenhouse, and we can spread seedlings and perennial food throughout the community, and other things like classes and education. Gabby is a person who's really into fitness and nutrition, and that's a big problem here. There's a lot of obesity and disease. Mm-hmm. And so we want to solve these problems from a central location and make that a center of a new community. And that's how we're going to build our community, rather than buying a big piece of land and doing it all from scratch, because this is something we can all do. And yes, all this infrastructure is here. Why don't we just use it? The community hall down the road never gets used. Yeah. The churches, sparsely attended. There's old commercial buildings. There's old lots. There's a lot of opportunities to create a community center in an existing community and really make it a community again. Because right now this place kind of isn't. Mm-hmm. It's a bunch of people in houses watching TV that don't know each other. And so we want to prove this model and try it out, have our mistakes, have our failures, have our successes, and document how to do that, and then kind of make a template that folks can follow. Well, that was a long rant. Why do you tell me your story, Gabby?
My story? So I come from a little bit of a different perspective and kind of environment than Matt here. I'm actually originally from Indiana, as the shirt clearly states. And I come from not necessarily a rural town, but more like a suburb of a city. So we were within like 45 minutes of Indianapolis. And I grew up, my family never had a garden. We knew a couple people that had a garden. Just self-sufficiency wasn't really a thing. It was just kind of, the typical American dream is what my parents pursued. And that's kind of what I grew up around. But my particular angle as far as the Sovereign Village project is concerned is I actually have a journalism background. So I went to school for journalism. And when I graduated, I it was 2015. The job market was not great. All the jobs that I applied for in journalism were, just the salary would not even pay like my rent. So I would have to have 2 jobs to even make it work. And so I ended up actually starting a local newspaper in the town I was from. And that was kind of my first I didn't know it at the time, but that was my kind of first experience creating community through information and media. And I realized how important it was for us to create this entity that was, you see, like the Chicago Tribune just got bought up by a hedge fund. And they're not the only ones. So many newspapers across the country have suffered that same fate. And so us having that ability to we were not dependent on anything other than our business surviving. And we had advertisers and that was it. So kind of fast forward, I did that for a year and a half. And then like Matt said, we were raised to kind of believe we had to leave the city, so I was young, or the country. So I was young. I thought, I need more experiences than this. Moved to Nashville. And I've been kind of in marketing jobs ever since. And when it kind of hit for me that I realized, I sacrificed all these things. I sacrificed my love of journalism to create this life in the city that I didn't even really want. And so the past couple years have just been, that realization. And then kind of moving out here the past year, I've gotten involved back in journalism again. And so, again, from my perspective, the Sovereign Village Project, it's really about how do we kind of consolidate information and keep people involved in their local communities, because no one really cares about what happens around them, but it's the most important thing. And so through my kind of venture, Finding Country, which he's probably mentioned before, that's what I do, is I try and share the stories of rural America, that are not the stereotypical things that you'll see in national media. And I just try to bring communities together, local communities together through the written word, I guess. So I don't know. I feel like I went all over the place.
If we feel like we're rattling off stuff and talking quickly, we're trying to sum up our lives in about 5 minutes. But I have to read some of these comments. They're so great. Hello, highly concise beings. I'll take that as a big compliment, because one of my problems with so many of these otherwise great content creators on YouTube is often that they ramble for so long, and it's like, boy, time is limited, guys. We got stuff to do. We have homesteads to build and property to buy and communities to start. And by we, I mean you as well. It's like, we don't have time to be like rambling on. I do like that YouTube has now developed this subculture of entertainment and homesteading, and that's become a thing. I love that's a niche now, but some of the homesteading stuff for my taste is a little bit too much on the entertainment side, when it needs to be entertaining but informative, because we have a lot to do. We all need to be getting self-sufficient quickly. So I will take concise as a compliment. Reliance on Trust says you're very well spoken.
Oh, thank you.
And he says that you have a delightful perspective, and that's really why I want to bring Gabby more into the Sovereign Village Project, is because her experiences so far and her perspectives and the courses of action that she's taking in this community are so relevant. The Sovereign Village Project was just something that started really on a whim with some vague ideas, and it's slowly materialized into something real. And the same is kind of happening with Finding Country, is we're finding our voices, and we're realizing that both of us as content creators, part of our role in these times is to combat this information war, is to say, here's an alternative perspective to what's the literal propaganda being given to us. Because we're just now realizing the depth of propaganda. Everything in entertainment has taught us how to view the world. And we've been taught to view rural areas and community and family and these most crucial, essential things as backwards and absurd. And we want to say, this is not only a better way of life, it's actually the only way of life. And it's the solution we need to go back to. We're all going back to this life, even the people who will follow the insanity into the cities and who would do everything they're told and walk into this dystopian nightmare. Eventually, we're all going to be back in the country again. I'm of the belief that history has a lot of patterns that tend to cycle through, and it's better to get out now. It's better to build the self-sufficiency, to build the community, to build the better life, to where ideally you don't really notice what happens in the rest of the world all that much. You know, you think about, there's the joke going around about, has anybody told the Amish about coronavirus? Truth is, of course, I actually do know some of the Amish out here are very aware of it, but all jokes aside, they're insulated because they're self-sufficient and because they're prepared and they have a strong community that doesn't. How would you enforce lockdowns in an Amish community, short of sending in troops with guns and then being a little more on the nose about things? So we really think that returning to self-sufficiency, but also caring for the earth and rectifying the damage that we have all done to the environment is simply the course of action we have to take. There's nothing else to do. There's just so many other great comments. We have more we want to talk about pre-planned and more questions to answer, but there's already so many great questions. And this is what has excited me for so long about the live stream, is having the conversation. So we might have to do this more than once a week. You wrote down a question earlier from New York Redneck.
Yeah.
By the way, New York Redneck, I'd love to know what part of New York you're from. By the way, so many of these people have channels, Reliance on Trust. There are so many great channels on here that have tons of great information. I'll try to point them out as we go. Homesteading the Heartland. Many of the question here is, how large a root cellar would you recommend for a family of 7? Now, I do not have any number for that because we're exploring this question ourselves. We just built we're building a root cellar onto our new property. But I would say there's, first of all, kind of 2 kinds of root cellars. There's like a built-in one in the house that you might build under your foundation or under a portion of the house or all of the house. For us, we had to make a crawl space foundation. So we just figured, well, we'll go a couple extra bricks larger and have a root cellar underneath that's also a storm shelter that you can kind of stoop down inside. So our answer was, well, it's just going to take up all of the space of the footprint of the house, 24 by 24. I would say if you're digging into a hill and doing a root cellar separate of the house, that's going to be its own separate equation to figure out. What I would do is try to figure out what's the space taken up by the things you're going to store in it. For example, are you storing canned goods? Are you storing winter squash and potatoes and carrots? If so, just sit down and start doing the calculations. Say, okay, a shelf of a dozen jars takes up X amount of space. For my family size, we'll feasibly go through this many jars. You know, just do the math on how much you really want to store. But I think the answer I would give would be as big as you can feasibly make it, because it's such valuable space. It's underground, it's climate controlled, it's cheaper to build than a house because a root cellar can have a dirt floor and it can be pretty primitive. So it's cheap space to build. You know, we were already building that crawl space foundation. So it was practically free. It was a few $100 extra to gain all that extra space. And as a tornado shelter, it's just a storage place. We don't have a shed yet. We don't have a barn. So it's just cheap, convenient storage. So unless you're actually digging it out of the side of the hill and doing it from scratch, if it's a part of the house, just make it as big as you can. I mean, it's wonderful space, and it's cheap space to build. It's going to be cheaper than buying a new outbuilding. Like, I can't see any scenario in which you won't use the space, unless you're just building a giant bunker underground, which we all want to do that. Let's see, we've got some more questions here. Oh, New York Redneck says it is into the side of the hill. So obviously you're going to be limited on what the shape of that hill will provide with you and what your financial resources are. If you're hand digging it or using machinery for bringing in a rental for the day. But the way I would think of it, if you're, let's say, bringing in a tractor to dig out the side of a hill and bringing in concrete mix or something like that, you might as well still go bigger, pretty good sized. But I've also seen very small root cellars on a lot of old homesteads. I try to pay a lot of attention to old homesteads because they have a lot to teach us. And they're often very small, at least from the front. This is making me think that I need to probably gain access to more root cellars. I'm thinking of one root cellar on my friend's farm in Oregon. They had a small farmhouse on I think it was about 60 acres. And it was an old 1900s, beautiful old, almost Victorian style farmhouse. So it was built back in the day when this was a practical concern, when everybody had large families. And that root cellar was about 10 by 10. It was a small bedroom size. So that's the only specific measurement I can think of. And I know that would have been a normal sized family back in the day when that house was built. So that's the only closest I can come to a number. But I would say bigger is better. If you can afford it, root cellars are good, useful space. I think we should all start building those again. Go through a few more comments here.
there's a mention of like laundry detergent alternatives or recipes, but I think reliance on trust answered that.
Okay, reliance on trust, man. He's in here just answering questions. It's so great. He's a wealth of information, and his channel has a lot of good stuff. He's from my neck of the woods in Oregon.
Oh, cool.
So us Oregon folks are always a little bit different, but like we live wacky fun lives. I like Oregon people. Reliance on trust. All right. Let's see. Conrad Homestead says plandemic. I think that, and New York Redneck says scandemic. Both accurate words, because regardless of where you fall on the reality of the virus, you know, there are many people on with a lot of good points, and I'm not a doctor, and I will never have the answer to any of that. Obviously, we all know that the data has been manipulated, that PCR tests have been falsified, and that the reactions have been rooted in propaganda and hysteria. So to some degree, absolutely, it's a scandemic and a plandemic and just rife with lies and deception. So I think most people on the channel are probably on the same board as that. Really, I think what we're all trying to figure out, one big question is like, what's the course of action? You know, and it comes down to deeply philosophical arguments like, what do we do in the cycle of history, you know, where we're basically reaching the climax of totalitarianism. And generally what happens in this cycle, if you look at Rome, if you look at any historical cycle, it gets more and more totalitarian, and then it all collapses, and then it's you're back to square one and back to chaos. And so the question is, for a lot of people, like, do we engage in the process of resetting, which is the stuff you can't talk about on YouTube, or do you just kind of choose flight over fight and fade away and hope for the best and only resist openly when you have to? And I'm really on both sides of the argument. That was a little detour. I went down there. St. Helens, reliance on trust says St. Helens crashed when the mills shut down. Yeah, yeah. St. Helens now has a lot of crime and a beautiful place, but a lot of those towns have just been destitute for a long time because of manipulation. And I've seen that just all over the nation. It's the same all over the nation and the world. I think the drive to urbanization is artificially created. It's created by people with agendas of totalitarianism and just who are lusting after money and power. That's how we all end up in cities. The longer I live, the less I think the Industrial Revolution is anything that should be lauded as a good thing. I don't think our lives have gotten better. Possibly they've gotten longer, but the more I learn about the literal manipulations of history, because all history is manipulated by whoever won the last war. Every time a new administration comes into any nation or anywhere, they rewrite the history books. And so when I look back, I do question, was life really any worse back in the day before the Industrial Revolution? They always paint this picture of high infant mortality and of just constant tribal warfare and all of these things. But I have to question that's coming from the same research institutions that, for example, handled all the research on this pandemic. It's like, has our history been that manipulated? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. That's in the realm of conspiracy theory, which is, I should have a separate channel for that. But I'm really going a lot of rabbit trails off of these comments. All right, let's get back to them. Somebody recommended Patriot Nurse, that she's here in Tennessee. Okay. New York Redneck says Patriot Nurse and Reader in Tennessee, both great channels. Patriot Nurse is a wealth of information. So much good if you want to like shore up that medical side of your prepper knowledge, and we all should, but also as a homesteader, she'd be a great one to follow. That's becoming a big focus of mine, is healthcare, because that's a big question we have to answer as our healthcare system becomes more apparently connected to totalitarianism and just ill intentions. And the more we realize that the health establishment is doing bad things to us, documented bad things, the more a lot of us want to pull back from it. But obviously, if you break a leg or if you're having a child, you have to answer these healthcare questions, because there's also a lot of, in the herbal healing space, in the homestead space, there's a lot of hooey and snake oil as well, because anybody can say anything. Anybody could sell you, magic holy water that will heal your cancer. So we're starting to go down that route of studying and researching alternatives to healthcare, to the healthcare system. Gabby actually just did an article on Finding Country about our one last independent doctor here in town. I would highly encourage reading that. You can go to findingcountry.com and sign up.
Because the rest get bought out by the big medical groups, and then they're basically kind of like threatened, like they can't leave. Once you're in, and you can't leave, and you don't, those sort of doctors obviously lose all sort of subjectivity. They have to prescribe the medications that are within their kind of institution, and suggest that people go to certain doctors in their institution. And so it's a really interesting and kind of also terribly scary thing to kind of dive into, but it really woke us up, honestly, like seeing that that's happening in our own community. And I just don't think people even realize it's all things that kind of happen behind the scenes, and they don't even realize how much that impacts their freedom of choice when it comes to their health care.
And that just makes me think it's been so phenomenal, Gabby being a journalist, for me to be the fly on the wall, because I came from a background where we distrusted the systems and the power structures and hierarchies of human nature, because my mom was like, I remember her stocking up for Y2K. She was of this mindset already. So I was raised in kind of a culture that was more that acknowledged that we should be separate from the world. I wasn't raised in any kind of like crazy fundamentalist church or anything, but it was like a denominational, but a serious church where it was a country church and they really believed what they said. And so they always had like this perception of the world that the world was not, that we are not of the world. And so that certainly influenced my thinking. But with Gabby, she went out to take care of the dog. With Gabby, she came from a really more straight-laced, normal suburban experience and background. And she was maybe a little bit closer to the left side of things when we first met. And so to watch her confirm and verify just about every conspiracy, like through a journalistic standpoint, it's been fun to watch and fascinating, because like I'm starting to realize that I'm not as crazy as I thought I might be, because Gabby is merciless when it comes to facts. She will check facts. She will call me on stuff if I'm not backing it up with fact. And so to watch a journalist work and then to see the deceptions at play it's an amazing experience. Yeah. And like you said, frightening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I tried to do a story early on in the pandemic, where in Tennessee, they were having a particularly kind of incriminating time with their numbers. And like at one point they were saying, the bars were the worst.
Yeah, they shut down all the bars
or whatever. So they shut them all down. But then, like, I don't know, 4 months later, it comes out that construction sites had 1,200 cases and
bars had 15.
And there were just multiple instances of that. And so I actually, through kind of a Facebook group, met with this young, like probably our age, girl who she was one of the people who I guess were the contact tracers. And I thought those were just an interest, like there were never really any stories about who these contact tracers were. And I did this whole story about how she basically told me that it was like she had a English lit degree. She didn't have a health or medical degree, and they were entrusting her with like taking people's information. She was doing it from home. There were problems with privacy.
Wasn't she advising people on medical things?
Yeah. And advising people on medical things when they didn't obviously have that background and authority to do so. And I tried shopping that story around to like...
They won't touch it.
And they won't touch it. And so this past year has been really illuminating for me from a reporting standpoint, because I went to school, a liberal arts college, and, was kind of sold this idea of journalism being like the equalizer and being the thing that actually helps people. And I've just seen it over the past, couple years really actually hurt people and cause more division. And
that seems to have been an almost existential crisis for you to watch. If it's not too personal to say too, because Gabby's a person who acts on her beliefs, and she believes in journalism and on the power of the. And she really believed in that and act in that way. So it's hard. It's been hard, I assume, and it seems like it's been really hard for you to watch journalism become what it's become. To watch it to become like a wartime propaganda machine. It's exactly what it now looks like. And I know I don't know how much you want to share, but like some of her experiences with friends who've applied for jobs within journalistic entities who are big ones, big mainstream journalistic entities, is that they basically essentially ask you, will you report whatever we tell you to report? That's essentially what they're asking the new hires to say. And if you don't agree to that, I'm sure they're ousting you as well. So it's like, it's been an insight. Gabby has been an insight into watching. I love history, so it's like watching. I feel like I'm in 1933, watching the media first be nationalized, and then we're about to watch that propaganda machine, while we were in the midst of that, complete the rest of the picture in our move to tyranny. It's like watching history be made.
Yeah.
All right, let's get some more questions here answered. So many cool comments. Conrad Homestead says, some of the Amish I've spoken to were concerned that there were rumors of cash being eliminated. Yes, and obviously that has to happen, right? They need to move to a cash has been great. Fiat currency has been phenomenal for the central bankers and the shot pullers and the powers that shouldn't be. But it's time they need something more efficient now, because cash leaves too much ability for people to transact freely. So clearly, we all know that logically we're going to that biblical, archetypical one world currency. It has to happen. None of this is conspiracy theory. None of it relies on anything other than logic. If you're a person whose ideology is, I can fix everything with more power, then of course you need everybody on a one world currency, and the dollar is not that.
Yeah.
It's clearly going to be something digital. It just is what makes sense. So it's an important question. That's not just the Amish being worried. The Amish are the true anarchists. Amish are actually, like, in a lot of ways, and not that they're perfect, but they're in a lot of ways living very independently of the system, and a model we should all study, at least, if not follow, at least study. And so really, when we look at the Amish being concerned about the fall of cash, then we realize that we need to be concerned too, because we have to move away from this system. If we're going to survive and thrive, we need to be completely independent, and we need to be not taxed out of our gourd. So that's going to rely on not having every transaction be digital. So the obvious big answer here is probably cryptocurrency. All of the problems with cryptocurrency, we're aware of those. Obviously reliant on the grid, reliant on internet. But that's a big answer to how are we going to transact when cash is gone? And there are things like Monero and Pirate Coin. Jack Spirko has a lot of great work on this, where if the grid is up, you can use these, and they're untraceable transactions. I don't understand the technology of all of that. I kind of just find people I trust and follow their work. But cryptocurrency, as long as the internet remains active, there are a lot of ways around the system, and it's going to be very hard for them to shut that down. So potentially that's an answer, or it's at least an answer right now in the meantime. My next album as a musician, I'm going to only be selling for cash or cryptocurrency. I'm not going to sell it for you won't be able to make a normal payment. I'll have an option for that, but it's just going to go to a nonprofit, to our local fire department or something, because I'm not paying any more taxes if I can legally avoid it. So cryptocurrency is an obvious answer for avoiding that. But from there's different questions of how to answer the cash problem. I forget the name of it, but Chris, who's here on YouTube, showed me it's like a gold paper currency. Yeah, do you know where it is?
Yeah.
It's a gold paper currency, and it contains a certain amount of actual gold, but there's only a trace amount in there. If you melt it, if you burnt that piece of paper, then you would end up with the gold, and so it has that real tangible gold value. But I think it's in like a $3 or $4 dimension. So it's in a dimension where you could actually make real normal transactions, and it should hold its value. So if you could take 3 of those things and buy a shovel, then no matter what happens on the planet, you're still going to be able to basically go buy that shovel with those. So they're a very resilient currency, and I think they're growing in popularity. I'm going to study more up about that, and I'm sure we'll do a video on alternative currencies these days. But the Amish have a real concern about the demise of cash, and we're just going to have to innovate and find answers. But we will. Humans are good at that. We're good at innovating, and of course, you can always go back to older methods of barter. Obviously, those aren't very efficient, but there's a million ways around dealing with cash, and we should be getting out of the cash business anyway now. The more we're prepared, the more we can get ahead of these things, the better. Like, imagine if you already had your systems of self-sufficiency going a year ago. You would have been a lot less worried as you started seeing things collapse. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'm coming to the end of a long day of many shows. I was playing out in Cookeville last night and just played in Nashville this morning. So there's not much left there. Frecklebeard is what it says. What is everybody's thoughts on home births? I want a large family, and I don't want to give money to doctors who profit from my baby being ill. Very good point, and a big question we're figuring out right now. What are your thoughts
On home births?
Home births.
You're
a woman, so you have a little more say in this.
No, I know a lot more people are doing them, and I think I would be comfortable with doing it. Kind of, I know you've mentioned like there are places that, people will have, well, no, those are different. Those are like more like midwives, right?
Oh yeah. So Gabby's talking about this one.
Yeah.
I don't know the name of the businesses, but they're midwives who actually have offices next to hospitals.
Yeah.
They'll buy like an old Victorian house in a neighborhood, maybe 2 minutes away from the hospital. And so I know a lot of major cities, that's a popular way for midwives to work. So that could be for people who are a little bit on the fence. You could have a midwife and be in a much more comfortable setting. This is different than home birth, but kind of along the same lines.
Yeah.
But be close to the hospital. For if you needed traumatic care and access to all of the infrastructure the hospitals still have. Because like we were talking about earlier with healthcare, that's the problem, is that healthcare is becoming untrustworthy and dangerous and insidious. It's clearly a tool for people who are garnering more power and more money. And like you said, they make money from you being ill. And there's so many things happening within that space that are so disturbing, like the pharmaceutical company buying out Monsanto, Bayer buying out Monsanto. It's like, you see the okay, so the people who make money when I'm sick now run my food supply. Got it. You can see the conflicts of interest and you can see the dangers they present. And so to me, hospitals are places to be avoided at all costs. So we've talked about our options and the ability to use a midwife. I know there's a midwife.
Yeah. In the someone just mentioned don't allow Hep A shot right after birth. Because
shots.
Yeah, that's the other thing we're scared of is like, just someone like taking your baby and be like, we're just going to poke
or
a
apply
problem
pressure and get you to agree to something, put a shot, and you're just in the system from day one, and you're in that horrible sterile environment. I mean, I was born in a hospital. It's not bashing on anything, but it's not the way I would want to do anything. I don't want to be in those places anymore. I don't want to be in any institution of that size anymore. Honestly, my distrust for the system, which I think is rooted in pragmatic logic, it's not me being crazy. My distrust of the system is very reasonable, and I don't see anything good coming out of those large hospitals. So I certainly wouldn't. No. I wouldn't want to engage in that way. So yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern. But there's a lot of good answers. I actually spoke with somebody from the channel, I'm sure they're watching tonight, who back in the early days in the 90s, they did a midwife in Georgia, and then Georgia banned it. Just recently, they may still be illegal in some states. Like, that's an astounding thing to realize how far everything already has gotten when it comes to tyranny. Yeah. Like, they can tell you how to have a child and force you to have a child through their companies and their hospitals. Like, unbelievable that it's gotten that bad. But there's a midwifing center here in Tennessee at the farm, which is an old hippie commune, a really cool place. And they've pioneered a lot of that. And a lot of that's like a lot of natural healing stuff is starting to seem like it's starting to integrate a little bit, or it has been integrating with mainstream medicine more, which has been good. But I'm curious to see what's going to happen. I heard Wikipedia just marked that chiropractic is now, it's a pseudoscience. So the masters of thought at the technocratic level, who run all of basically everything you see on the internet, they just decide something's a pseudoscience, and it's a pseudoscience. So you realize we're gonna have to find solutions to our healthcare, make plans, and start supporting the businesses of independent doctors and natural healers, herbal healers, naturopathic doctors. We really need to start building their businesses up and figuring out the healthcare question, because that's a big question in the self-sufficiency space. Is how do we become self-sufficient when we break our leg? All right, more great comments here. I had a home birth for my son and loved it. It's a comment from. Oh, actually, also, I just remembered it when I was a child. We had some friends of ours staying at our property. They were moving in between homesteads, and they stayed with us for a few months. And they had a home birth in our basement. I just remembered that.
Oh my God! Yeah. You never told me that stuff.
Yeah, I just remember. I did not think of it since I was like maybe 6 or 7, so it's a foggy memory. But I remember we had a home birth in our basement. I'll have to ask my mom about that. It wasn't her. It was this friend's mom. But yeah, they had the child right there in our basement, and that child, they're a family friend, and they're very healthy and happy. All right, stop me if you see a good comment. Christina Locke says, sorry if I mispronounced your last name. Before having my child, I did a great deal of research and was utterly disgusted by the maternal and baby mortality statistics in the U.S. Yeah, and I wonder what's happening. And I'm looking right now at the miscarriage issue happening. It's hit friends of mine, close friends,
Oh, I
really
know
bad.
many people who. Yeah.
And that terrifies me, and that makes me not want to eat any food that comes from a store, and not want to drink any water that comes from a municipal source, and get out of cities. Like when I see a sudden spike in miscarriages, a documented spike, something is at play.
Well, and actually, my brother just went through kind of a health scare thing, and basically he got a scan, an MRI scan, and they thought he might have cancer. And so for a week, my family was just like hanging in the air, like we don't know, And so they had him, probably how my parents do. A lot of tests that were very expensive, and because my brother is in college, so he's still on their healthcare, and then I guess they went into the room, a week later after he did all these tests, and the doctor was just like, well, it's not cancer, but we don't know what it is, and then he just kind of walked out of the room, and my parents were like, I'm sure they've had many experiences like this, but they still continue to like go through these same options and these same routes because they don't know, I guess there's just so much trust in these people who, they only have, 5 minutes allotted for each patient. And so it just ruins all sort of transparency in that system.
Yeah.
But they're still expected to pay out. And
so permapastures, by the way, y'all, if you just want action, so what I love permapastures for is, besides that Billy is very entertaining, the whole family is great, he's got the information. If you want to figure out how to do rotational grazing, he's going to have like in a concise, easy to understand format. So permapastures is asking, what's the status on your building projects? Because I was about to go down another healthcare thing and just spend this whole thing talking about healthcare, because that's an issue we need to, all these things we have to figure out solutions for. We need to be like, okay, let's just assume we won't have access to healthcare because we don't know what's happening with vaccine passports and all that. But it's like, if you don't follow the agenda, you're going to be blackballed from the marketplace. So we have to find solutions to healthcare, education, energy, food, everything. Anyway, Permpasture says, what's the status on your building projects? And we should definitely go to a more positive route there. Well, where are we at with the house? You want to update everybody?
Yeah, so this week we're supposed to be getting siding and a septic system. So it's going to be a very expensive week for us here. But we're really excited because after the siding, we're done with our contractor and kind of we're doing a lot of the interior stuff, just kind of trying to figure it out ourselves. So it'll kind of kick off that stage, and then hopefully we'll be done and ready to move in. That's kind of the current status, right? And then we're since we're really close to that property, we're also starting to build some infrastructure for our garden there, because we have one here started, but we're also kind of building that out too. So I just consider that part of the.
We should do a complete rundown of this property. So we might use up a lot of our remaining minutes of this hour, but I guess we're allowed to go over. It's our channel. So, so we're going to do so much content on these properties. Get like Sovereign Village Project. It's like a passion of mine, but also with the audience growing the way it is, I want to use it to kind of artistically like show us figuring out how we're going to become self-sufficient because I think we're kind of a good archetypical millennial couple here. I'm a musician. I've always been frugal, but like I've never made much money. And Gabby's a journalist and a writer and like makes a moderate income. Gabby's probably like right middle of the road income. And I'm very low income. I make very little cash in music. And so I think we're a little bit maybe below what just a typical millennial couple would be in income. And so what we're seeking to prove is that with no resources, no family money, no inheritances or anything like that, and no really family help or anything, that we're able to do this, to build a home in a self-sufficient homestead, like truly self-sufficient. That's where we're trying to get. Yeah. And we want to show that just anybody can do this. We've only started on this journey a year or two. Obviously, real estate was a little bit cheaper, but we want to figure out these workarounds, and we want to present these solutions here and then on Finding Country, and just show the way for people to do it. And then for people with established homesteads, they can hopefully glean information from how we build our self-sufficiency. And a lot of it's going to be focused on how do we monetize our properties, how do we make our living from our property so we don't need to rely on the system for income, and our passions. We're like, how does Gabby keep writing the way she wants to write? Because right now she writes for really big publications, but it's often she's given a topic and it's not something close to her heart.
Yeah, or I'm a ghostwriter, and so my name doesn't even get put on the article. So,
and I'm a musician, and watching all of the bars get closed, and they're still reeling financially. Most won't make it. So the question is like, well, how do we use our property to help us build businesses where we pursue our passions? And I think that's going to be a unique perspective we can offer. That's going to matter because that should be the goal. Is I want to be self-sufficient, and that means income. So if you like working with wood, or if you like making music, or you're somebody that likes helping people who are broken get fixed or something, like how do you use your property and your farm and your homestead as your business that makes it easier for you to make a living doing your passion? Because that's utopia. That's the dream life, really. When you forget about wealth and fiat currency, you realize I just want to do what I want to do all day. Yeah.
Like I've never gotten my paycheck and that solely create meaning for me.
Yeah.
If I write a really good article that I'm really proud of, that's what makes me happy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's just, we let that kind of guide how we're going to build our lifestyles. Cause we've done the soul sucking,
we've both been in the city and the grind, and Gabby's still crawling out of corporate America. Anyway, all that to say, we're gonna cover everything from the property I'm on to the one I was previously on and the one we're going to, and show this whole progression. And Finding Country is going to be the main vehicle for that. That's going to be where we really put that detailed content. I'm just going to keep looking at a camera and saying whatever the heck I want to say on this channel. But so we'll get more in depth with it. But basically, the strange journey that's led us here so far is that I bought a piece of property with an old dilapidated trailer. It was like a drug house, meth lab, the worst property you can imagine. It had piles of garbage from decades of dumping. It had human feces in bags. It was the most nightmarish skin crawling place you can imagine.
Oh yeah.
But it was $10,000. And I knew I didn't have 10,000, but I had a few thousand saved, and I knew I could buy that. I could get the money together, and I did, and I bought that and spent a year I didn't fix anything. I just cleaned and cleaned and cleaned.
Yeah.
For a year. It was a nightmare.
Every weekend, I was living an hour and 15 minutes away at that point, and I would drive up every weekend and help him clean stuff. Yeah,
if you're wondering why I'm married, it's that was the ultimate test.
It definitely was. It was. We look back at pictures of his first night there, and we just can't even believe
sleeping with a gun by the bed because there was meth people breaking in. It's gonna be a fun story to tell in depth. But anyhow,
that's what he started with.
And then right at the beginning of the when they broke open the vials or the virus, whatever we're calling that. This cabin we're in right now came up for sale, and I was able to purchase it. And Gabby moved out here to build her own homestead because she saw the lifestyle that I was building out there with the garden and everything, and wanted it. And we were just dating at that time, and hadn't known each other that long. And so it was still, we weren't in a dedicated relationship where we decided to build a life together. So Gabby was like, but I still want to do this. So she bought 5 acres, and it just we toured tons of different properties.
Yeah,
and the only candidate that worked was 5 acres that was half an acre for me. Or it's 5 acres, half a mile from here. So she bought that property, and we figured out a house that would be a good option for her to build. And then the lockdown happened, and it was oh, let's get out of the city. And it hastened and tested our relationship, and we decided to get married at that point. It was it's this works out. This is a good arrangement.
Yeah.
And, no, obviously there's more to it than that. But anyway, so we moved into this cabin while building out Gabby's house, and now that's going to be our current homestead. We're going to sell this place pretty soon, as soon as that 5 acre home site is done. And so we're building a 24 by 24 house on that one, and that's going to be probably not a perma homestead because we want
more land.
We want to be able to graze. We want to be able to graze animals. And while there's a lot of we're going to be able to do a lot when it comes to poultry and all of that, we want to move to large animals like sheep and cattle, and we're just going to need more land for that, more land for hunting, more land to really be as self-sufficient as we want. But it's going to be, so we're going to follow the journey of all 3 properties on finding country and a little bit here. And then hopefully we'll be able to follow the final property here someday.
But one of the things you should probably talk about, like in a future live or video, is just how, I know Jack Spearco is another channel we follow, and he just covered this, like how do you choose your land based on basically like permaculture design, or just like what you want out of it, like what resources do you want to get from it and give back to it, what kind of systems do you want, like how can your land fit into your lifestyle, and I think you helped me a lot through the journey of looking for land, kind of assess the land, and you helped me kind of build that, figure out like what do I really want this land to do. So I think that's something that you should talk about at some point, because you're really good at kind of assessing all the.
Yeah, so so many of these questions lead us onto these long rabbit holes, because we're really planning a lot of content, and that's what we want to. That's going to be our main focus outside of building the homestead, is just making lots of content, because we think we basically need to train up a nation full of people to move back to the land and start regenerating the communities around them. We need to do it fast. To me, that's the only solution I see to the times we're in, is we need to get rural into groups of like-minded people who don't want to be tyrannized, and build our own food security and energy security, but also start solving the environmental problems, because those are a big piece of the puzzle. I think the reason why we're experiencing, the collapse of our normal way of life isn't just because a bunch of people want to get more power. It's a natural reaction to our diminishing natural resources. Nobody argues that we're not losing our topsoil in massive quantity. Nobody argues that we're not losing tons of species, and that our waterways are becoming degraded, and like that we're losing clean water aquifers everywhere. Like there's all these real environmental problems that are causing all of what's happening and hastening everything that's happening. So it's like, we need to provide a real solution for ourselves and say, like, forget ideology. We all need to go back to basically permaculture is the only viable option I see to not just surviving, but also thriving by not being essentially enslaved. Because when I see what's happening in the city, when I see businesses being shut down arbitrarily, and I saw it personally, I see a system of slavery. Now those people are all dependent on these stimulus checks, and they're dependent, and they're barely holding on to their houses. Now they're going to vote however they're told to vote. They'll have to save their homes and to just try to keep their families afloat. And then you look at what's happening with the food supply and all of that, and it's like they're going to have to do as they're told. And so I can only see that there is evidence. It's happening now. This is not speculation. We've seen a rise in tyranny in this last year. We've really seen it since 9/11. It's just been increasing. You can point to specific rights that no longer apply, like the Fifth Amendment, Second Amendment, First Amendment, and say, if we want to have good lives that are not in that, we're going to have to be in a rural area in communities, and we're going to have to start treating the land right and regenerate the bad soil and the problems that have been caused so far. And actually, there's a great guy who's a great resource on how to do that. I got to find this comment again. By the way, you should just go check out everybody's channel here that's in this comment thread. Liberty Under Attack. If I'm remembering who that is, he talks a lot about permaculture and agorism. Great content over at his channel. It says, "Cheers from the Free Republic of Paznia." P-A-Z. Yeah. I love micronations and the idea of just going down the whole sovereignty thing, and that's a whole nother topic someday I'll get to cover. But my gosh, we have so many topics backing up. We can't even get through the comments and really read all of them. We'll go through and respond to a lot more of this stuff too, if we run out of time tonight. This is what we were so excited about. And we're just going to have to keep refining our system, because eventually we'll probably move off of YouTube. Eventually I'm not going to be able to talk freely. And so we want to maintain this community and this conversation and get better at it. This is our first live stream, so do be a little forgiving. We're going to go back and critique ourselves later, and because we want to get to a lot more comments. We went down rabbit holes on every little comment tonight, because there's so many great folks
But,
here commenting.
I want to point out, Isaac, congrats on getting your land at 22. I think like looking back, I wish I would have started
22.
even earlier. Like,
Wow.
yeah, I wish I would have kind of come to that realization
Yeah.
and pursued that route a lot sooner.
And actually, let me tell a little bit of my story there too. All my life, I knew I wanted to have a homestead. I didn't know how to phrase it, and I didn't know how to bring into reality what I pictured in my mind. But I was raised in the country on a small 5-acre homestead. We lived in the mountains. We bordered a state forest. It was a great place to live in Oregon. And so I was already raised in a pretty self-sufficient life. But I didn't really understand until I moved to Portland first for several years, went to college there. And then I moved to Nashville. And it was after a few years in the cities, I finally realized that this isn't what I want. And I always thought I would be successful in music and then just go buy that property in the country and just move to it. But now I see that a better solution, and this is so far proving very true, is to just pursue the dream now, move to the country and find a way to do what I want, because I'm not trying to be a famous musician. I'm trying to be a person who can play music all the time for a living. And so when I think about what I really want, I can achieve that better in the country. That's why we're working on turning the property into like a farm to table event place too, where like I can add my other passion, music, and bring that to my homestead, make my homestead my business.
Yeah.
I keep going down these rabbit holes. Every comment is so great on here. Sugar Creek Homestead of Tennessee says, our land was clear cut, completely stripped. It looked horrible, but I could see potential in what it could be if allowed to heal. Yeah, that's exactly with the property next to us. That trailer, I cleaned it up. Like I said, I wasn't able to fix the house. I just couldn't even get to that. I spent a year cleaning it up. But when I sold it, the people we sold it to are wonderful folks who wanted to be self-sufficient and independent, and they bought it. And he's a carpenter, so now he's been just turning what was an old single wide trailer into really a beautiful home. That will be there for a long time. Like, it
was like night and day.
yeah. So it's amazing to watch. What a privilege to get to watch that, because we're neighbors. We got to see the property continue to heal. So this was a place that was a drug den where just misery, and it was a landfill. Now that land is healing. There's a garden on that land. There are fruit trees on that land. And there's a family living there now that are like living a good, free life. Like, what a improvement of a place.
They like talk about selling that, and, kind of what the selling point was. Like, he didn't have the means to be able to do to that house what needed to be done. But that was kind of when he started first exploring permaculture. And so I watched him for, a year and a half, completely like get all of the trash out of the backyard, and he completely transformed it into a permaculture setup. He had a swale and everything, and
little baby swale,
and that actually, I know when you were in the process of selling it and putting it on all sorts of different sites, the reason you went with them was like they were actually, the selling point for them was the garden. Was the fact that there was already infrastructure there. And
that's a good point about what we're trying to explain and convey about how we're going to build community. Like, that's how you build communities. Like, we made my biggest financial investment I had ever made was buying that property. And then by just believing in permaculture and planting that out, the family that moved there was like-minded people who just wanted they're just wonderful people. And that's the people we would want to put in an intentional community, but we didn't have to build an intentional community. We brought them in by buying that lot, fixing it up, and planting it out. So that's why I think there's this room for opportunity, is like the permaculture fix and flips, where you just buy an old degraded property, especially if it's got an old single wide or some kind of structure, because you can get around a lot of building codes that way.
Yeah.
Buy anything you can, even if it's I've seen $500 lots in Arkansas. I bought one. Buy whatever you can get, and then just go fix that up. And I believe that investment will pay for itself. Like, somebody's going to want that as a bug out property or something, or you might, but then you can leverage that into a bigger property.
Yeah. Cause I know someone had asked, when you're building a community, how do you vet those people? And I would say that's sort of in a roundabout way, a way that you kind of vet is figuring out what people's values are. And just making sure they align with yours, because we don't 100% agree with everything, that our neighbors say or do. But because we have that one shared value, it really like just means the world to us.
And I think thinking in those terms, then, like, as we figure out these community solutions, you can see what's going to happen. There's I think, again, a pattern in history where when things start to shake up and collapse, you see cults rise. And you see a lot of that in the space. A lot of the people who are actually pioneering communities seem to be kind of like cults, like maybe more benign cults, but like they're very fundamentalist. Nothing wrong with that. But they're the first to like have that really common identity drawing them together. And that's what's kept communities like the Amish together, is that common identity. But I think it can be more casual, where it's not a common identity. It's just a shared value system of like, I don't want to tell you how to live your life. You don't want to tell me how to live my life. We want to make the place around us better. We want to not treat our land like garbage. Like, there doesn't need to be an ideology or any kind of, because that's just another system of control. It's very simple. Like, this whole block of wonderful neighbors that we have who are like our community, and that we all rely on each other. It's a real community. We all have different beliefs. Like, some are more religious, others are not religious. Like, there doesn't need to be any racial or specific religious specifications to coexist. For us, the vetting process isn't hard for who we want to bring into our community. It's like basically anybody who's just not a jerk.
And I think on our specific block right here, we actually like kind of use each other's talents too. Like, since moving here, Matt and I have ended up on the volunteer fire department, because our neighbor is the person who runs it in our specific area. And so, I get to bring my kind of information sharing talents to that organization. He gets to bring his medical experience to that organization. And so it's just an interesting thing too, where I think, if you're trying to build an intentional community, I know Matt talks about this a lot, but making sure you have people with certain talents in there too, and being able to really get to know people before you bring them in, and knowing like what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how can you kind of piggyback off of those within the context of a community.
Yeah, that's a good point. Permapastures. Noah says, what is the name of Gabby's blog?
Finding Country magazine. If you Google that, it'll be one of the top like 3 or 4 searches.
It's findingcountry.com. Like, Gabby's pouring, so it's a new idea. What are we on, episode 4?
We're on issue 4, so it's
you actually
magazine.
have to read this stuff now. Like, you actually have to read words on a page. I know that's we've all forgotten how to do that, and I'm the biggest YouTube addict in the world, but we do need to start learning to read again. I think it's going to be a part of our healing from the brainwashing culture, and to get away from media and to start thinking again clearly. It's almost like we're walking, like I love the movie The Matrix, because it's like we are walking out of a matrix in a way. And part of that is like leaving the entertainment matrix of just Netflix and constant YouTube and just constant stimulation. That's part of our journey, is like turning off the TV. Well, we don't have a TV. We don't have Netflix. And it's amazing when you start to deprogram and start to read books again and learn in a different way. That being said, I love YouTube for the resource that it is. Oh, we're already at an hour. Artemis, Selena says, it's unnatural for people to agree on everything. So find those who agree enough and embrace their individuality. Exactly. It's very simple.
Really pretty simple.
But we've just learned this, and we've been more observing what's happening around us. As we're just trying to live. Basically, I've been selling myself and selling Gabby on the idea of permaculture. It's 2 simple ethics, like care for the earth and care for people. It very much resembles the golden rule or golden rules, like from the Christian perspective that we come from. It's like the one we all know is love your neighbor as yourself, or the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But we forget about like love thy God part of that. But it's like God created nature, so if you're treating nature badly, you're not loving God, and you're not loving people either. If you're degrading, if you're buying food and you have the choice not to, that degrades topsoil that comes from a bad destructive system, then you're not loving God and you're not loving people, because you're ruining the topsoil, you're ruining the earth. Like, it's time for, like, the Christians have been the worst about this, coming from a Christian perspective. Like, we've just ignored the environmental side of everything. We've been so willfully ignorant of like that, and like also our allowance of war. that like Christian church has just been like, yeah, let's go bomb the Middle East. But like it's simple principles, and just by trying to act that out throughout our lives, we've entered this community and we've started to improve the community around us and become more secure. That's another thing. Like the more we get involved in our community and like help solve problems and take it upon ourselves to like go out and do the water rescues when it floods,
Yeah.
the more the community gives back to us. I'm getting tied into this community now. I teach lessons all over the place. So if the bar is locked down again and I lose my living as a musician, I still have people who teach. That's like what part of what got me through. And we're tied into this community. So we were strangers coming into this community. And I've always heard that like areas in the South are like very like exclusive and like, like it's hard to get to know, but that's not been our experience at all. People have just welcomed us right into the community.
Yeah. And as millennials, that's also a message I want to share to our own generation, is that like people, like when we went to the city, we realized like we're 1 in a million, you know, like our talents don't seem helpful to people there, but out here, like they want us, like they want what we have. They want the brain gain. They want all of that. They just don't know how to attract it.
And that's why we're like evangelists for our generation too, is like, if you share these values, and there's a lot more of us who are millennials who share these values than people realize. Like, yes, we're a minority. But like there are a lot of people like us. It's like, come out to the country and like live this lifestyle. And because it's like everyone thinks that everyone's going to rush into the country, and in a way they are. But like I think about this county, and there's like a burned out house 2 houses down from here. It's just an empty lot. And there's like a lot of these rural properties, and like, and it's like, why not fill those up with families who are like improving the area around them? We need more people like that. We do need more people in communities improving. So even though it seems like, I know, because everyone's worried about like the Californians and the New Yorkers coming into the states and changing the values, and that's a real concern. It's also like places are more welcoming than you think if you're there to do good and you show it and you get involved.
Yeah, and if you show it, because I've made just so many great connections in this area since, you know, helping out with the paper, the newspaper here. You know, I do social media for a couple organizations in town, so I get to use the co-working space for free. And it's just like, it's like little things like that where, you know, people show their appreciation here, and they need you, like they need your talents. And like, I think that's the only way.
Like we're the youngest blood coming into a lot of places. Like the church we went to recently, we were, you know, there's not a lot of people our age coming into these places who are wanting to build families and like build lives. So there's a lot of room. Billy had an important point from Pastor's Farm. He says, and return the surplus to the first 2 ethics. That's kind of like what biblically what was the tithe. But it's such a good way of outlining that, like, just you return the surplus. You just like in a garden, you return the surplus to the land. So like we've designed our septic system. Yes, our septic is like our poop and our pee is surplus in a way. We have like, so our septic is designed to I'm going to be replanting a lot of the trees below it. And it's at the edge of our wood line. So there's no agriculture happening below it. So I'm going to plant a lot of my nitrogen fixers and trees that are good mulches and things like that, and tree hay for animals, which is like forage for animals. I'm going to plant those below the septic line, so they will be getting all of the nutrients from our actual human waste in our house, but returning it really indirectly. So we're not growing food in the septic system. We can just take all of that as mulch and run it through our chicken systems and on our garden systems. Like mulch is the center of everything we're doing, really, mulch and compost. So we can return everything coming from that. But I won't go too far down the permaculture rabbit hole. We'll have to do specialties. So I think the way we're going to do these community hours is we'll pick a topic. So this was just introductions, just figuring out the live stream and all of that, and seeing that I need to answer comments a lot faster. But each one will have a topic. So we'll do a permaculture one. So feel free to make suggestions about that, about specific topics to cover. And then we'll just probably do one topic and then just tackle questions. Conrad says hello to Billy. There's such a cool community of homesteaders on YouTube developing now. That's so much fun, is going and meeting people who we've met through the internet. Like I just yesterday was out in Crossville. And met some wonderful folks, and they hooked me up with some great perennials and some cool heritage breeds, and I brought them some seeds. So obviously be reasonable, but like this idea of like meeting strangers on the internet who are like-minded, it's only been
It's
just
been- yeah,
positive,
it's been
amazing
very
experiences.
positive,
And like
yeah.
now I'm making like the best friends of my life.
Mhm.
Like the only real friends I've ever really had who are like think the way I do by just kind of taking the risk and going to somebody's farm
Yeah.
and meeting them and just meeting a total stranger and hearing their stories. It's we have the excuse of finding country and,
Yeah.
and signing and Sovereign Village Project to do things, but really it's just wonderful to meet like-minded people.
Yeah.
It feels really good.
That's
You're building
been the most.
you're building
yeah.
a community that's not just regional like we're trying to build, but also larger. It's
Yeah.
like a community to tie all these communities together, really, in a way.
Mhm.
All right, well, we're getting pretty late there. Homesteading in the Heartlands have to put the kids to bed, and we have to put ourselves to
Yes.
bed. My voice is shot. I've been singing like 20
every
hours
night.
this week, so
Yeah.
I think we're going to turn in, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll try to answer more of these questions either in another live, or I'll go through and just answer them in the live chat. And give us suggestions for how to improve. The live stream is new to us, and we're going to just work with what we've got. We're just using a laptop right now, but do feel free to make suggestions, and we'll keep improving it as we go. Everyone, in the meantime, stay safe and happy homesteading.
Yeah.
And we'll figure out how to end the stream in about an hour. There it is.